Does it really matter what you shoot an elk with? You know, there are some folks who really think so and others who don't. So I've got my good friend Colton Heward here. He's the managing editor of Petersen's hunting magazine and a longtime professional elk guide in some pretty cool areas of the West to give his opinion. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to visiting with you about elk cartridges, Colton. Thanks for coming back on the show.
You bet. Happy to be here.
Yeah, Colton's been a big part of the podcast over most of the time we've been doing it. And yeah, you're always a popular guest. So
I don't know about that.
Appreciate your time.
Yep.
So let's just dive right in.
Okay.
Why do elk maybe require a different cartridge than your average, hunter across America? Whitetail, hog hunter, bear hunter is going to carry.
To put it simply, they're obviously bigger, but bigger doesn't always equate to being tougher. And that's where the elk, I think, excel and challenge a hunter and the cartridges that we take afield is elk. A big bull elk is flat out tough. I have seen so many bulls just soak up lead on well-placed shots. And so they're plain and simple, they're just tough.
Yeah. I like to think of it, they're Cape Buffalo tough. They're not Cape Buffalo mean, but once a big, especially a bull during the rut, gets his adrenaline up, he can soak up some lead.
I've seen bulls in full rut get shot and just carry on chasing a cow. Like they don't even know that they've been shot.
That's gnarly.
And they'll run off and their legs will wobble and tip over, but they literally never knew they got a bullet sent through their lungs.
I hope that's the way I go.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, chasing my beautiful bride and just tip over, pass out. What a way to go,
There's
man.
worse ways. Yeah.
But I digress.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just dive right in. And I've asked you to think about 3 cartridges you can recommend as being really, really useful and practical on an elk. And then another 3 that are just flat out your favorites.
Yep.
And let's start with the practical ones first. Just name them off and maybe give 1 or 2 little characteristics or features of each cartridge for those listening and viewing on YouTube.
Okay. The first one that I listed for the most practical cartridge was the 7mm Rem Mag. I listed that for a couple of reasons, but first and foremost, that's what I grew up shooting, and I've seen a lot of elk get shot with them, and the cartridge is done very well.
Sure.
So, a lot of what I'm going to say is just falling back on my personal experience of elk that I've shot myself, that I've seen shot with family and friends, and that I've seen shot by clients and other people that I've helped. So yeah, the 7M Rem Mag, it's an elk killer. It also offers hunters a wide variety of bullet options. And I think that should be the takeaway from this entire podcast is regardless of cartridge choice, your bullet choice is that much more important.
Yeah, absolutely. Cartridge is just a launching point.
Yep.
For the tool that does the task.
Yep.
Now it's an important launching point because you can have a perfect bullet and shoot it too slow and it's now not useful for those cross canyon shots. Cartridge is important, but man, it's the bullet that makes contact.
Yep. And I think that is not stressed enough. And so I hope that if nothing else that people take away is, shoot a capable cartridge, but most importantly, shoot a capable bullet.
Yeah.
And I think we'll dive into that a little bit more. But the 7 Mag offers a wide range of bullet options for hunters to use, and it'll reach out there and touch them too. It's a fairly flat shooting cartridge, and sometimes in the West, say 400 or 500 yard shot across the canyon, I have confidence that the 7M Rem Mag is going to do what it's supposed to at those extended distances as well as those close distances.
It's been doing it for a long time.
Long time.
And importantly, it's not very hard to shoot.
Yep.
Anybody that's got a little bit of fundamental training and is disciplined enough to practice with it can master the 7 Rem Mag.
Yep.
And that's including recoil sensitive shooters, women, kids, whatever, especially if you put a suppressor on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, there's some recent research done by some big names in the PRS world that's indicating that muzzle blast is as responsible for a flinch in many cases as recoil is.
Interesting.
And so the old adage that maybe you can fix your flinch by putting a brake on it, A big
Maybe,
aggressive
maybe not.
muscle break? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, something to think about. It can certainly help you spot your own impacts and make fast follow-up shots and so forth. But, side note, but something to think about.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So from the 7M Rem Mag that I grew up shooting, I would say my most recent cartridge that I would say is a very practical cartridge is Hornady's new 7mm PRC. Still shooting 284 projectiles like the 7mm Rem Mag.
Yeah.
But in a more efficient cartridge.
Yeah.
Again, this is going to benefit, especially when you're shooting longer ranges. Flatter shooting, higher BC bullets. And I just love the 7mm or the 7 PRC. It's just kind of fun. The ranch that I guide on, Hornady comes and hunts there every year. And so I actually saw the 7mm PRC kind of before it was ever announced. And the field testing of it. And then I actually had the opportunity before it was announced to take that cartridge to Africa and shoot several animals with it. And I've just fallen in love with it.
It's a really, really cool round. I've been guilty of writing that I think it's the best engineered 7mm Magnum ever designed.
Yep.
And I'll stand behind that. It doesn't yet have the vast spectrum of factory loads available, but there's getting to be a lot. I mean, Weatherby is loading 7 PRC ammo. Federal's loading it. Barnes has one of the most accurate factory loads I've ever fired in the 7 PRC, all with good bullets. So it really is up and coming. And folks, for those of you that are watching, we've got one of each here, the 7 Rem Mag and the 7 PRC. And even though the 7 PRC is bigger in diameter, the case, it's actually a little bit shorter. Some folks might look at that and say, well, that's less powerful than a 7 Rem Mag. Why would I want it? But in reality, of course, internal capacity increases exponentially with diameter. And so it holds as much or more powder. It's a very balanced cartridge case to bore diameter ratio. So it's not overboard. It's very polite Magnum. It's easy to hand load for accuracy, inherently accurate.
For sure. And the bullet choices in the 7 Rem Mag, the 7 Rem Mag's been around a long time. And so a lot of the bullet choices there are bullets that have been around a long time. With the progress of technology, which the 7 PRC represents all of the progress in modern cartridge design, you get those longer, sleeker, higher BC bullets, which have a slew of benefits.
You may not think you need them at whatever distance you hunt, and if you never hunt past 200 yards, you're probably right. But at 300 yards in a heavy wind, you can see a benefit, definitely. And at 400 yards, you can see a visible on-impact difference with the energy deposit, when it hits. That cartridge is kind of special to me, too. The Hornady guys once told me that from their research, from what they can tell, my daughter was the first one to ever kill a game animal of any type. She shot a bear with that here in Idaho, public land, across a canyon with it, just flattened it. My little girl shooting the biggest modern 7mm Magnum and didn't even know it was supposed to kick so much it hurt. She just killed stuff with it.
I think that's another thing about the 7 PRC. And I've shot a handful of different rifles chambered in 7 PRC. And in fairness, most of the time I am shooting suppressed. But recoil on that 7 PRC, it's
pretty manageable.
Very manageable. So
very cool. How about your third most practical cartridge for elk hunting?
The third most practical cartridge, I would say, and some people probably argue it's the first most practical cartridge, is 300 Win Mag.
Okay.
The
king, some call it.
I mean, you can't go wrong with it. Similar to the 7mm Rem Mag, there is a slew of bullet options, in very capable bullets, in various weights. You can up the velocity. You can shoot a heavier bullet so that it's going to transfer more energy. It's just a very, very versatile cartridge,
for sure,
and very capable in the elk woods. So
I don't have a love affair with the 300 Win Mag, and yet when I look back and count up the various mature bull elk I've shot, more than half of them have been killed with a 300 Win Mag.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is kind of a funny thing. I appreciate the cartridge and respect it so much. It is my go-to.
Yep.
I mean, I love a 300 H&H more.
Right.
I love the 7mm PRC more.
Right.
But so often I pick up the 300 Win Mag. In fact, this load right here is a 180 grain Federal trophy bonded tip load, and that's the one I use to take my Utah bull when, after a lifetime of applying, I finally drew that really, really good limited entry tag. And public land, DIY, ended up shooting a 402-inch bull running flat out at about 70 yards and broke both his shoulders, dropped him on the spot. That kind of tends to build some faith in a cartridge.
Does. Well, and I think it says a lot that you drew this tag that you waited decades for. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that was the biggest, most important elk tag that you will ever draw in your life.
Oh, for sure.
And you took a 300 Win Mag.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that speaks volumes to the capabilities of it and your thoughts of it, and I can echo those.
Yeah. Now, that bullet is still available, but has evolved since 2015 when I had that
couple
tag.
different times.
Yeah. And so the latest one is the Terminal Ascent in a 200 grainer. You can get it in a 175 as well.
That sounds right, yeah.
In the 300 Win Mag, but that 200 grainer, before it came out, I went to Africa with a bunch of boxes of ammo, and with a PH friend of mine, Jock Strauss of Kovas Hunting and Safaris, we shot management game in every angle we could find, tons of oryx and various things, and at some pretty extended distances. I felt like I had a journalistic responsibility to test that bullet's capability at long range. I don't like shooting at long range, but if it's part of the package that bullet is supposed to offer, as a journalist, I should challenge that.
Right.
And I did. And my gosh, that's a good bullet.
Yep.
I'm not going to dive any deeper than that, but that's probably my favorite of all the 300 Win Mag loads now. It's the 200 grain Terminal. So.
Okay.
Yeah. What have you seen clients bring and shoot elk with? And by the way, folks, Colton is not one of these guys that guides an elk or two every fall. You did it full time for many, many years.
I did.
Before you hired on with Petersen's hunting.
Yeah, I was full time for 9 years.
Yeah.
During and part time for 3 years prior to that. I mean, between bulls and I don't know how to throw a number on it. I would say between bulls and cows that I've guided or been a part of or gone and helped pack or spot or whatever, I've probably been a part of. It's got to be close to 500 elk.
Yeah.
Hitting the dirt.
That's a really impressive number.
It's a pretty big sample size to draw from.
Yeah. Now, since you mentioned cows and bulls, do you mind just taking a minute and tell us if you feel like there's a difference in the way a cow takes a bullet and expires compared to a bull during the fall, where he's approaching or in or just past the rut?
I think we hit on the rut a little bit, and the rut changes things. Bulls lose their minds. And because of that, hunters or predators are the last thing on their mind. And so, because they're so focused on breeding, yes, I think, we touched on, I think that does make them more apt to just soak up lead, just because it's like they don't even care. They're not worried about it. And they're just bigger. But I mean, a mature cow is going to be 350 pounds. I mean, it's still a big animal.
Yeah.
I've seen cows soak up lead, but again, I mean, you put a shot in the crease with a, well-constructed bull or cow, they're going to tip over within 100 yards.
Yeah. What's the biggest weight bull you think you've ever seen on the ground?
I truthfully, I've never brought one out whole to like weigh it. So these are total ballpark guesses. But I mean, I think that there's a handful of bulls that I've walked up on that have got to be in that 700-800 pound range.
Yeah,
I think so. I think your average bull is probably going to be closer to 6.
Probably,
if I had to guess.
I think I'd agree with that, especially the raghorns and 5 points and first year 6s that people tend to shoot.
Yep.
some of these bulls I've seen down in southern Utah on those limited entry units where, you get the age back from the biologists that cut the teeth and whatnot. They're 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yep.
My bull was 11 and a half years old.
Yep.
And I've seen 3 on the ground that just knock your socks off.
Yep.
Mine was one of them. And in each case, I had a pack horse along that we knew weighed just north of 1,000 pounds. And for fun, in each case, I led that horse up to where that bull was laying in the ground and just did it's a visual comparison.
Right.
But those 3 bulls, this is out of a lot of elk, just 3, but 3 of them were as big or even bigger than that pack horse.
Wow.
I think it's some of that southern desert genetic too, where they just can get a really big body.
Yeah.
And the bigger bulls you get, the harder they are on a bullet too. The more mass there is to challenge your bullet on impact.
Yeah, kind of like you mentioned, Cape Buffalo. It's just the way that those bigger animals are built. They can. It takes a lot more bullet to do damage.
So before we go and transition into your personal favorite cartridges for elk, let's just segue a little bit and address the elephant in the room. What do you think about little cartridges on elk? Because there is this big trend right now to even shoot them with a 223 with a certain bullet, 77 grain tipped Match King. And a lot of people are carrying the 6mm Creedmoor. And then, of course, there's the 6.5 Creedmoors and up, which is where I've always felt like elk cartridges start.
I would agree with that.
I've let my kids hunt elk with a 6.5 Creedmoor. I know a lot of people that have killed them, and they work.
Yeah.
It's kind of like pulling a 4-horse trailer with a half-ton pickup.
Well, and a lot of it comes back to as long as you stay within that cartridge's limitations.
Exactly.
And as long as you use a bullet that is well constructed. When people start talking about the 6.5 Creedmoor, that's everybody's cartridge that they love to hate. And I come back to one particular instance of a bull that was shot on the ranch by an exec from Hornady. And I think he was shooting the 6.5 Creedmoor just to show people he could do it. More just to prove a point. And he was shooting the CX. Is it 120 grain, I think, that's loaded in their outfitter line?
120 or 130?
Whatever it was. 120.
I think it's 120. I think it's one in the Creedmoor and 130 in the 6.5 PRC.
I was going to say, I think it was a 100. So I'm quite certain it was 120 grain CX bullet loaded in their outfitter line.
That's the right choice.
That's the right choice.
Monometal bullet.
He got on a big bull. His first shot hit him right in the pocket. The bull humped up, shot him again through the shoulder, and he pancaked.
Yeah.
You can't ask for any cleaner than that. And that's a big, rut-crazed mature bull. 6.5 Creedmoor down.
Perfect.
So, I always come back to that as like, can the 6.5 Creedmoor kill elk? Absolutely.
Sure.
But where people run into problems is they start trying to push the limitations of that cartridge, and then that's where you start running into the problems.
What was the distance on that hunt?
I want to say it was a couple hundred yards.
Yeah.
Right within the wheelhouse of it.
Perfect.
So,
like you said, I think where people run into problems is they try and stretch the distance too far.
Yep.
Maybe they have a super accurate rifle and they find it easy to hit an elk vital size steel plate at 800 yards.
Right.
You're like, I'm an 800 yard elk killer.
Right.
Well, your bullet slows down over time, and it loses a lot of that authority before it impacts when you're shooting that far.
Yep.
Plus, you've got wind and potential animal movement while the bullet's in flight. There's so many different other elements to consider. What do you think are some bad bullet choices for elk, especially in those littler cartridges?
Anything that's gonna rapidly expand. I think if you're shooting those smaller cartridges, you need to be shooting. My preference would be some sort of monometal copper bullet that's going to maximize penetration. It's still going to mushroom, give you some expansion, but it's going to maximize penetration and internal damage.
Bonded core or monometal or a partition type, Swift A-frame, not partition,
exactly.
something like that.
I know that's the small cartridge thing is kind of a craze right now. and you know what? Like, to each their own, but that if I'm going to the elk woods, that's not what I'm taking.
And if I, was ever fortunate enough to draw another very special tag like that one I have in southern Utah, there's no way I'm taking a little cartridge with a...
For a lot of reasons.
Yeah, so many reasons. I mean, for one, I just like shooting big cartridges.
Right.
Some guys like driving muscle cars.
There you go.
I got something I want to show you here. I don't know if we've ever discussed this. Have I shown you that before?
I don't think so.
Folks listening, this is an elk femur bone. For those of you looking on YouTube, you can see it. Here's the other side.
Okay.
This is a 6-point herd bull I killed in Colorado. He had 10 or 11 satellites around him. He was keeping out of this big herd. And if you look at that, roll that bone around. What we're looking at here, folks, is a femur bone that's about 4 to 6 inches shorter than it should be. It's crooked, and in the middle there's this big gnarled heel, where the joint or the break healed up. There's bone spurs every which way. It's about as big around as a grapefruit rather than, the handle of a baseball bat like the other femur bone. And there's bone fragments scattered throughout that.
Yep.
This bull was not only healed up, he had come back to being the herd bull.
Wow.
With that injury. That was a 50 caliber muzzleloader power belt bullet.
Interesting.
There's a lot of gristle around that.
Right.
All those bone spurs that I boiled out, and I found all the pieces of copper
jacket.
Yeah, there's pieces of lead and jacket, if you look closely, embedded throughout that thing.
That's crazy.
Found a piece of the belt. So that was probably a 250 grain power belt, which is a great whitetail deer bullet with a muzzleloader. Excuse me. It's too soft for elk. Hit him in the side of the butt. So first off, this person made a bad shot, right?
Shot placement was not where it needed
But that bullet did not pass through that bone. All those fragments stopped in and around it. And total penetration was probably 6 or 8 inches.
Right.
With a 50 caliber, 250 grain muzzleloader bullet, because it's a very soft, thin jacketed bullet.
And not going real fast.
Not going real fast. You look at that.
That's crazy.
Isn't that insane?
That just goes to show the resilience of
how tough have you got to be to heal up and then come back what is probably the next year or two after that happened.
Was he limping around at all? Do you remember?
I'm sure he was, but when I shot him, it was a pretty brief shot opportunity through the trees. I saw, this goes to showcase the importance of a tough bullet too.
Right.
I'd have 4 or 5 bulls pass in front of me at 4 yards. Raghorns, 4 points, 5 point, whatever. But I knew there was a herd bull in there.
Right.
It was real thick. I was on a little rise. And I could hear a bull that sounded a little different. He just sounded dominant. They don't always sound like they look, right? But this bull kind of did. So I was focused on watching this area. There were tons of cows. Finally, I saw a whale tail pass through a little gap and then a big shoulder come into it and stop quartering to me. I was just looking through my scope. I made sure that shoulder was attached to that whale tail, right? But I knew it was a 6 point on at least one side. Okay. It was toward the end of the hunt, and I thought that's good enough.
Yep.
And I was shooting a 6.5 PRC with 127 grain Barnes LRX bullets. Okay. He was between 50 and 70 yards, I think closer to 50. And I shot and hit him right above the big shoulder knuckle on the front, where that wrist-sized bone is. Took out about a 3-inch section of that, 6 or 8 inches of measured heavy shoulder muscle, and then 2 ribs, baseball-sized hole through the ribs. Lungs were just decimated, and we found that bullet at the back, just behind the back of his rib cage on the offside. We measured over 32, 34 inches of penetration.
Okay.
And I've always said, if I'd been using a bullet that was like this, that stopped, or, one of these tipped target type bullets that are so popular today, I've seen them stop on next shot on shots on 2-point mule deer.
Whoa.
They don't go through.
Interesting.
That's not going to go through that big shoulder knuckle.
Right.
Not every time. Now, you might squeeze past the shoulder knuckle and get it
or
done.
a fragment or...
Yeah, but I'm not going to count on that.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway,
cool.
not to digress too far, but let's talk about your 3 favorite cartridges now.
Okay.
And you're going to have to give us a why on these too. Talk through the virtues of the cartridges like we did with the others, but then why is it a favorite?
The first one carries over from my practical cartridge with the 7 PRC.
Okay.
We've hit on the 7 PRC, its capabilities. I don't think we need to keep pounding that. I just love that cartridge. I've seen it kill very quickly, very efficiently on a lot of animals. End of story.
Okay. Would you say that's the number 1 out of your 3 favorites?
Yeah, I would.
Cool.
Yep.
And If you had to pick one elk bullet that's currently on the market for that bullet, which would it be? There's a lot of good choices.
There is a lot of good choices. I come back to the 175 grain offering in the Precision Hunter line. It's
Okay.
a 175 grain ELDX. I've just had such good success with that bullet that I have a hard time straying away from it.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
and you know, it'd be a very good, do very well on elk. I've seen it do very well on elk.
Mm-hmm.
One caveat I would say is, you know, I wouldn't want to shoot a bullet like 100 yards with it.
Because it's going too fast.
Going too fast.
Sure.
So just want to throw.
So maybe not a good choice for thick timber hunting.
Probably not. If I was, you know, hunting in the thick timber, I'd, you know, shoot like the 160 grain CX or the 155 grain terminal ascent
or 170 grain terminal ascent.
Okay.
Yep. Or the 160 Barnes LRX.
Yeah, there's a lot of good options
out there. Yeah.
So,
and not to. This is your party, Colton.
No.
Just to offer a similar opinion, that 175 is just a fantastic bullet at the extended ranges.
Yep.
But for example, my son William hunts with a 7PRC, and I've got a load with 175 grain Nuzzler partitions that hits at almost the same point out to 300 yards.
Okay. As the ELDXs?
The ELDXs. Okay. So that's what he carries in his magazine when he's walking through timber or whatever. He figures if he's got a shot at 400, 500, maybe further, he probably needs to take the time.
Throw the ELDX
in. He's just 14.
Yeah.
I mean, you or I would probably flop down and have that bull dead before most people realized what was going on.
Right.
You know, not to toot our own whistles, but I've seen you in action, Colton. So, but, you know, I've taught him the longer the shot, the more careful you need to be. You need to take your time to make sure everything's just right. And if that's the case, you got time to dump a magazine, top it off with your ELDX loads or whatever you've chosen, and carry on. Sure. I did see that very bullet, the 175 grain ELDX, stop on a broadside shoulder shot on a mule deer, a 2-point mule deer.
Okay.
Stopped against the hide, and like they sometimes do, it was peeled back pretty hard, lots of fragments, the core was separated, but sitting right there with the jacket.
Right.
You know, performed beautifully. The mule deer didn't go anywhere.
Right.
18 inches.
Yeah.
But again, you know, I've had so many quartering 2-shot angles on elk that I'm leery about shooting something that stopped in a deer.
Yeah.
Just that was a fairly close shot too.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask the distance. So, you know, because I've shot several big bodied animals at, you know, distances of 400 or 500 yards and had pass-throughs with that. Yeah. So, you know, it's again, I think, you know, there is that sweet spot on the shooting distance that it needs to be noted, you know, if you're taking that afield. But man, I've just had such good success with that bullet. I have a hard time going back on it. Yeah.
I saw a good friend that worked at Hornady at the time, Neil Emery, shoot a nice bull moose at 611 yards with that bullet.
Okay.
And none of them passed through, but we found several against the hide on the offside. And moose is a big-bodied animal. Yeah. Your wife took a bison with that bullet, didn't she?
She did, and that was, you know, that was what I came was one of the instances that I was coming back to. Is she shot that big bull bison at inside 100 yards, and you know she made a good shot, and the bullet didn't get the penetration that I was hoping for, and we had to follow up. Yeah. I mean, it still died pretty darn quickly.
Sure.
You know, but again, had she been shooting like the 160 grain CX, I think that bull would have been dead in 60 seconds.
Yeah. So, and she'd have probably had a pass through.
Yeah.
That's a really good bullet.
Yep. So
that's Seth Swerzig's favorite elk bullet. That's the 160.
Seth is a man whose opinion I would trust.
Yeah. For sure.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Next of your favorites.
The next one that I have there is the 6.8 Western.
Okay.
Again, it's a modern cartridge. You know, I prefer that particular load right there. It's loaded with a 175 grain Sierra tipped Game King.
Yep.
And again, I don't have as much experience with the 6.8 Western as I do the 7PRC. However, I have shot a couple of bulls in the last few years with that cartridge and that bullet, and I've seen several others shot, and it always does its job.
Sure.
And I think one thing that is worth noting on the 6.8 Western is that is one of the most pleasant guns to shoot. Recoil on those 6.8 Westerns is so minimal. And to be able to shoot a 175 grain bullet, 2850?
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Out of a 24-inch barrel.
Yep. There's not much that, big bull elk and down that it doesn't do its job very, very well.
Yeah. That, I'm delighted to hear you say that, because the 6.8 Western is my all-time favorite short-action cartridge.
Okay.
Out of all of them. I
Yep.
mean, 223, whatever. I love the 6 Creedmoor.
Yep.
But I love that one more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, like I said, I've just, coming back to just my own personal experience in recent years, I've seen a lot of animals get shot with it, including elk and elk-sized game. We took it to Africa and shot kudu and gemsbuck, and you did the same thing last year. And anyways, I mean, I think that cartridge has proved its worth. For
sure. I've noticed, at least in my experience, that tipped Game King bullet, the 175 grain version in that cartridge, seems to be the toughest of the cup and core bullets I've used. I've seen it pass through zebras.
Yeah.
And some other pretty big bodied game animals, and not at crazy distances. It doesn't have, one of the locking mechanisms, as far as I know, like a Hornady interlock or a Remington core lock, but I think it's a thicker jacket.
Okay.
I think the jacket tapers to a thicker configuration. Plus, I think there's some hardening alloy in that lead core.
Okay.
And I was going to ask if you've seen a similar thing with that, because I have never seen one of those bullets catastrophically grenade to nothing, fragment to nothing.
No, not that comes to mind. And I'm thinking back in fairness, I would say the majority of animals that I've personally shot and seen shot with the 6.8 have been at extended distances. Like I would say like 300 to 500 yards on most of them. Which
is kind of its sweet spot. I mean, it's good
at
closer too, but out to 500 yards, even 6, it's money.
Yeah. It's like I'd be curious, if you shot an elk-sized animal at 100 yards, I'm sure it would still kill and you'd get the penetration that you needed. But again, I think that sweet spot, you're going to get that little more penetration at that little longer distances.
Yeah, because you're not losing as much weight off the front. You're not creating that massive frontal diameter that has the parachute effect.
Yep.
The closest thing I've shot with that is a coyote, which doesn't count. It's like 20 yards. And the next was a big-bodied whitetail in Nebraska, and I shot him quartering away, hit him at the back of the ribs, and the bullet came out the tip of his offside shoulder.
Can't ask for
that's, a couple feet worth of a dense, rutted-up whitetail with that bullet.
Yep. And,
of course, that's pretty close, 40 yards.
That is close, yeah.
So I've been impressed with that.
Yep.
And I think like you mentioned, it's so mild to shoot.
Right.
For somebody that maybe is a small frame shooter that just doesn't want to carry a real long rifle, may not have the physique to handle recoils effectively, although I think that's an overplayed card. I don't think physique plays as much part in recoil tolerance as some people would say.
I would say that, definitely. I mean, you talked about, Sophie. And I've seen my wife shoot my 7 PRCs. I've seen her shoot my 30 Nosler. And I mean, my wife's tiny.
Yeah.
And it's like, she just,
she's money with it.
It's not a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I read a thing once that postulated that big, bulky shooters actually feel recoil more because they have so much mass, their body doesn't move and flex with the recoil. It has to soak it up. Yeah. I don't know if it's true or not. I'm not a recoil scientist, but it's fun.
I guess in theory, it makes a little bit of sense.
I have seen really small frame shooters, like my Henry, when he was 9, he shot my buddy's 7 rim mag and his first shot was great. And then he held it too loose the next time. And you could see his whole body flex back with that rifle until it scoped him real hard. He didn't like that.
Poor kid. Yeah, I'm sure he didn't. Yep. Nobody likes that.
No. All right, number 3.
All right,
What's
number 3.
Your third favorite elk cartridge?
This one is a little bit out there, but the reason that I threw this in there is I was guiding a client. I was actually co-worker of ours, was Tom Beckstrand.
Yep. Fantastic guy.
Yep. And he was shooting the 33 Nosler before it got released.
Yeah.
And
he writes for Guns and Ammo. He's an optics columnist. He's a retired Army Ranger sniper.
Yep.
Has done some gnarly stuff that most of us
knows his way around a rifle.
Yes, he does.
And we'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, 33 Nosler is the last one that I threw in there for this particular reason. We found this bull. We dropped in on him. I can't remember exact shot distance. This has been 7 or 8 years ago. But shot distance, if I remember correctly, was maybe 200-300 yards.
Okay.
Not too far, shooting slightly downhill at him. And if I remember correctly, he was shooting the 225 grain AccuBond.
Nice choice.
And he shot this bull, and that is the deadest bull that I've ever seen get shot. And what I mean by that is he shot that bull and he knocked his legs out from underneath him, and that bull didn't kick. That bull didn't twitch. That bull didn't flip an ear. That bull was just out cold on impact.
Right now.
I've seen a lot of elk drop on impact, but I've never seen one just
drop
lights out.
Yeah.
So ever since then, I've had a little soft spot and for the 33 Nosler, and again, that's a very small sample size, right? That's one of one. Could it be replicated again? Probably. I don't know, but I so vividly have that memory of how effective that cartridge and bullet combination was on. That was actually the biggest bull elk I've ever guided.
Oh, nice.
He was just over 370. Whew. Big bull, and again, you talked about body size earlier. This was a bull that I knew about. We went in there to kill that bull, and I on the hoof, and I'm a mule deer hunter. Okay, most people who listen to this podcast know this. Like, I am a passionate mule deer. However, I've hunted a lot of elk because I've guided.
Sure.
And so I've gotten, I would say I'm fair at field judging elk. Not going to tell you I'm
It's being humble, folks.
I'm fair, okay?
Colton is dang good.
And I was guessing this bull on the hoof to be like in the low to mid 350s.
Okay.
And when we walked up on that bull, the first thing you see is the enormity of his body.
Yeah.
And then the antlers exponentially just keep growing. And again, his body was huge, which made his antlers look proportionately smaller than what I thought. And so, again, just coming back to the 33 Nosler with that 225 grain AccuBond knocked this just massive bull, both headgear and body-wise, right off his feet and just dead.
Limp and done right now.
Done.
No twitching, no thrashing. Yeah.
No thrashing.
That's fantastic.
So anyways, I know that one's a little bit out there, but that one instance has made me a believer in that cartridge ever since.
Well, and it's a good representation of the modern 338.
Correct.
You're going to get similar performance out of a 338 Lapua, although nobody likes carrying them because they have such big cases. I didn't have a cartridge to showcase here on the video, a 33 Nosler, but I do have a 338 Rum, which is just a little bit longer. It's about a quarter inch longer, very similar case shape and diameter and all that. And that's what I took to the Aleutian Islands for my bison hunt in January this year.
That's right.
Fantastic cartridge. And funny enough, a year or two ago, I did an Elk Cartridges episode with Ron Spomer.
Okay.
And he's kind of a he's a 7mm diehard, right? But he likes shooting the smaller stuff, 243s on deer and whatever. Knocked my socks off when he said he thought the best cartridge for elk ever designed was a 338 Win Mag.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that man has seen some things over his life too. He's in his early 70s now, and he has been there and done that.
Yep.
And if he says something like that, it's for a good reason.
For sure.
Yeah. Very cool. Now the 33 Nosler, excuse me, is a little bit, let's say it's almost becoming obscure now.
Yeah, you're not seeing a lot of them.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate because it may have been the best of all the Nosler cartridges.
I don't remember the exact ballistics of it, but it was pushing that bullet. It was cooking. I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember the exact ballistics. I don't even want to throw a number out there, but I remember Tom telling me and me just
Yeah.
Like, whoa, okay.
It was a couple hundred feet per second
Faster,
than
yeah.
the 338 Win Mag.
Exactly.
Yeah. As a side note, I hunted in the same camp. I think you were even there when John Nosler came and hunted, and I asked him what his favorite of all the Nosler cartridges were, and he says 33 Nosler.
Interesting.
And he was hunting a mule deer with his 33 Nosler.
Oh, that's when he killed that big buck out east.
Yeah, 200 plus.
Yep, that was a big deer.
Mm-hmm.
I was there in camp that week.
Yeah. Anyway, it kind of surprised me. I thought he'd say maybe the 7mm, the 28
right.
Nosler or something.
The 28 Nosler is definitely the most popular. That one's kind of
sure.
maintained its popularity since its introduction. So.
Yeah. I think it may fade, what with the 7PRC's popularity.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it'll die.
I mean, they're just different cartridges.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both going to have their strengths and their weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a big speed guy, shoot the 28 Nosler. You're going to get a little more velocity there. Personally, I mean, extra velocity is good, but the elk that you're shooting isn't going to know the difference in a couple hundred feet per second slower, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the 7PRC gives you the efficiency, the longer barrel life, the more civilized cartridge. It's easier to get it to shoot well, I think.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, Colton, let's leave specific cartridges and talk about characteristics of a elk cartridge that you want.
Okay. I mean, if you were to just look at the 6 cartridges that I've named off, the smallest caliber bullet is a 277.
Yeah, in the 6.8 Western.
In the 6.8 Western, and I think that's about where I would start with what I would say is an effective elk cartridge.
Okay.
And obviously there's a broad spectrum of cartridges within those calibers.
Sure.
And they all bring different nuances, different pros, different cons to the table. And truthfully, I'm going to come back to what I said earlier. I think if you're shooting, anything in that 270 and bigger,
mm-hmm.
as long as you're shooting a well-constructed bullet, and stay with it and know the limitations of what you're shooting, you're going to be just fine in the elk
sure.
woods. So,
so 270 or bigger, well-constructed bullet. There's 2 distinct characteristics.
Yep.
Really quickly, define a well-constructed bullet for us.
Something that's going to maximize penetration while still providing some expansion. I would say, either like
so this doesn't happen.
So that
you don't
doesn't
have a bone stop your bullet cold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people have, I don't know if it's preconceived notions or beef or whatever, but I feel like I hear a lot of people complain about copper bullets and their terminal performance. And to that, I would say you just need to shoot more stuff with them, because I've seen a lot of animals shot, as you have, with copper monometal bullets, and they are extremely effective killers.
Yes.
They're not going to give you the big mushroom effect that, say like a burger is going to give you or something like that. But, you can't replace that penetration and that bone breaking power that a solid copper bullet gives you. So copper bullet definitely falls within those parameters. A bonded bullet, again, it's a bonded bullet's kind of your best of both worlds. You're going to get a little bit more expansion than that copper bullet.
A little bit of fragmentation.
A little bit of fragmentation.
Can help.
It can. But it's not like your target bullets or your real fragmenting bullets are just going to come apart on impact. So, when I say well constructed, I'm specifically talking about copper and bonded bullets.
Okay. Very cool. And some of the less obscure that like don't have bonded in their name, like AccuBond or Interbond, would be those federal bullets, the Terminal Ascent, the Trophy bonded tip. They're half monometal and half bonded. The rear half is all copper. The front half is a bonded lead core.
Right.
The H-type partitioned bullets, a Swift A-frame, bonded and got the partition.
Yep.
Nosler partition, still nothing wrong with that. It's a great bullet.
Right.
Doesn't have the aerodynamics.
Most of your cup and core design bullets are going to be adequate too.
Especially the heavy for caliber
Exactly.
ones. Yeah, if you're going with like 180 grain 30-06 bullet, you're probably fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
there's controlled expansion bullet and a certain diameter. What do you think about velocity? How much velocity do you want for a cartridge you're personally carrying in a good elk unit?
I mean, I wouldn't say I've ever really thought about like, oh, I need to have this specific velocity, but thinking to the velocities of the rifles that I take afield, most of them are right there in that like 2,800 to 3,000 feet per second muzzle velocity.
Yeah. So let me just throw a kind of a classic example out there. A lot of guys are carrying short-barreled 308s, 16 or 18-inch barreled 308 with something like 150 to 165, 175 grain bullet.
Right.
2,300, 2,400 feet per second. Folding stock, cute little suppressor, the whole works, right? Do you think that curtails your ability in big canyon country?
I'm
kind of trying to set you up here.
Well, I think a lot, again, you just have to, if you're going to hunt with that, you just have to understand its limitations and stay within them.
Right.
You know, that's not a gun you're going to shoot an elk at 600 yards with.
Probably not even 400.
And so, like, again, if you just know those limitations going into them and have the willpower to stick to those limitations, and I think there's a lot to be said for that, because, you know, when you're out there, it's common that like an opportunity will arise that's pushing our own capabilities, and you know, we've prepared all year, we've waited all year, you know, this is what we live for, we're going to push to try and make it happen. And I think that skews some of the decisions that are made.
I agree.
Shots that are taken.
I think the hunting gods like to test our ethics.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, a hunter has to have the willpower to recognize his cartridge's limitations and just stick to them religiously.
Yeah.
Like if your gun's good out to 400 yards and you have a shot at 475, don't push it.
Get closer.
Get closer.
Yeah.
You know, and if you can't get closer, come back another day.
Yeah.
Like we owe it to those animals to try and kill them as quickly and efficiently as possible. And by pushing the limitations of our cartridge, we're putting those at risk.
And I think it's important to note here, folks, that the limitations Colton's talking about aren't accuracy, because I bet that guy with that short-barreled 308 can pound a steel plate at 600 yards.
100%.
But if his bullet's not going fast enough to expand on impact, he's going to punch a little knitting needle hole through that elk, and it's going to die a slow death and very potentially not be recovered.
Exactly.
So you got to have enough technical savvy to calculate how far out your bullet will expand. Yep. And that's your maximum if you're a good shooter.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, and on the flip side, you know, you said if you're going to shoot those cup and core bullets, shoot those heavier for caliber. If you're shooting a mono-metal bullet, you know, you can get away with shooting those little bit lighter, a little bit faster.
Yeah. Maybe you
bullets.
should do that.
Yeah. You know, and I had an eye opener. I've always subscribed typically to the bigger is better mentality. And I was in Africa a few years ago, and we were shooting 270s, and we were shooting 130 grain E-tips, Nosler E-tips. Yeah. And we were hunting southern greater coot, big body. I mean, we're talking bull elk size. Sure. And truthfully, in my preconceived notions, I had some reservations about shooting a big bull kudu with that bullet. I did. And again, knowing that I had those preconceived notions, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I've got to get close. I've got to make sure my shot is on the money. And make a long story short, I ended up shooting a nice mature bull at like 75 yards and put it right through both shoulders, and he pancaked. Yeah. And you know, again, you know, whether it's that instance or the instance that I said earlier with the exec from Hornady shooting that bull elk with a 120 grain copper bullet, you know, that dropped. You know, if you're shooting those copper bullets that are going to maximize that penetration, break bone, you can get away with shooting those little bit lighter bullet weights. Yeah.
And I think that's an important note. And I would add too that monometals are super forgiving up close. Yeah. You're not going to destroy that bullet and lose an animal because it grenades and blows a cantaloupe-sized hole in the shoulder. They're not as good, in my opinion, at the extreme distances. I try and draw the line at about 450 or 500 yards with most, not all, but most of the monometal bullets, because they don't retain enough velocity to have that hydrodynamic effect on impact. Just the way I work.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on.
Cool.
So.
Any other characteristics that you really want in a hunting cartridge? You haven't even mentioned accuracy.
Well,
that kind of goes without saying, doesn't it?
Here's the thing with accuracy, and again, I think this comes back to a lot of my fondness of the 7 PRC, my fondness of the 6.8 Western. Do these modern cartridges kill that much better than our classic cartridges? No. Short answer. They're going to display very similar killing power. Again, there's benefits. We're not even going to dive into those right now. But what I'm getting at is one of the huge benefits of shooting these modern cartridges is they are inherently accurate. I've shot. It's got to be 8 or 10 different 6.8 Westerns now that I've written on and tested. It's probably half a dozen different 7 PRCs that I've written about and tested. Every one of them, and we're talking from like $500 Mossberg rifles to Gunworks rifles.
Yeah.
The full spectrum, right? Every one of them is shooting MOA or better with at least one factory load.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
It is. And so there's a lot to be said for that. And again, you're not usually going to get that with those classic cartridges out of, more often than not, you're not going to pick up, a $500 rifle with like one of your old classic cartridges shooting factory ammo and shoot MOA type groups.
Right. It can happen, but usually you're going to have to hand load to get the same level of accuracy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think accuracy is a given. But I think that the accuracy, like I said, that's a big part of my fondness of those modern cartridges.
Sure. Outstanding. Well, any other thoughts for our listeners and viewers here, Colton, on how to effectively and efficiently kill, harvest, take, however you want to put it, big bull elk in challenging circumstances? Something else, I'm going to go off on a tangent here too. A lot of people shoot elk on private land and in pretty easy conditions. Now, the ranch you hunt is not one of those, but when you then, that's almost a different realm than something like a deep country elk hunt in the Bob Marshall Wilderness or the Frank Church Wilderness, where you might work for a week or 10 days to even see a bull.
Right.
And then it's going to be across a canyon with a wind, and it's very, very challenging. You might be on a super steep slope. You can't lay down and get prone.
Yep.
There are a lot of different challenges. And for me, I think it's important to get set up with a rifle that you trust and shoot well, with a cartridge that's accurate and launches enough bullet.
Yep.
And then, of course, a bullet that's built for its task.
Spot on. Yep.
Well, you can't leave us hanging with that. We need some words of wisdom.
I got nothing. That was about as good as it could be said.
Hit my head on.
I think I would just end with coming back to what I hit on earlier of, make sure you're choosing the correct bullet. Don't just go down to the hardware store, grab whatever's available.
Yeah, don't buy cheap stuff.
Yeah.
If it's cheap, it's probably wrong for elk.
Yeah. Do your research. Find a bullet that is well constructed, is going to deliver the penetration and the power that is needed to take down a mature bull and become proficient with it.
Fantastic. Words of wisdom, folks, here from a chap who is, I'll tell you what, Colton is pretty humble. He does not blow his own horn very loudly, but it's pretty good horn. Thanks again, man, for coming on the show.
You bet.
I know I always enjoy these conversations. It's like I just want to get together and pal around because we have good chats. But I think, I tend to pound the use enough gun mantra pretty hard.
Yeah.
And I know there are some people out there that think I'm probably, an old-fashioned FUD that doesn't know what I'm talking about. And if I would just catch up with the times, I might become enlightened. But if a smart car-sized cartridge is enlightened, I don't want to be enlightened.
There you
go. I'm happy where I'm at. I like my big cartridges. And I guess it's a little bit gratifying, I will confess, to have somebody with your level of experience come on and kind of corroborate the way I think about elk cartridges.
Yeah. To each their own. But,
Sure.
you know, we all have, you know, different sample sizes that we can draw our opinions off of. And, you know, there's a lot of opinions out there.
Yes, there are.
And I think that's one thing that people need to be careful of, is where they're drawing those opinions from. You know, like if the only elk hunting experience that I had was that experience I had watching my client shoot that 33 nozzler, you know, that's one and done, right? and that same thing could happen, say, on a fluke thing with a 6.5 Creedmoor. And if that was what, you know, then people.
But it's less likely.
Likely,
but
I mean,
physics are there.
The point that I'm making is, you know, make sure that you're drawing this information from people with that, from a large sample size, that provide that foundation that's backed up by experience.
And another important thing too is no system is without its failures. And when
100%.
somebody starts claiming that this new thing is the best ever and that it will never let you down, be suspicious, because they're either inexperienced
or they're done it enough.
Yeah. Or they're not telling the whole story.
Yeah.
And either one's dangerous.
Yep.
I want to share. You mentioned the big 33 nozzler knocking the bull down. There was a story I read by an old-time gun writer, and he's one of the legendary greats that's passed away now. And I can't even remember which one it was.
Okay.
So my references are weak here, folks. But he went hunting moose.
Okay.
And he took his 375 H&H. Now, I've shot 3 bull moose, and 2 of them were with the 375 H&H, one and done. Right. Well, apparently the guide that he hunted with was a Native American. And this Native American drummed into him, you got to shoot lots and shoot fast because moose are big and they don't fill bullets, right?
Right.
He shot, and the moose literally went boom, but with his legs up, right? And the legs just kind of did the wobble and he went limp. And this Native American guide was just astounded. And afterward, he asked for one of the 375 cartridges. And for the rest of his time, this guy'd run into this Native American guide at various shows and things. This guy carried that 375 cartridge in his pocket. Anytime somebody asked, what's a good moose cartridge, he'd pull it out.
That's awesome.
That's a good moose cartridge.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Kind of a fun story.
Yep.
You get enough physics at work and some cool stuff can happen.
For sure.
Yeah. And we'll leave it with that. Thanks again, Colton. Appreciate you, buddy.
You bet.
Folks, make sure and follow along with Colton's work in Petersen's Hunting Magazine. He's doing a fantastic job there with Editor-in-Chief David Draper. I get to write for that magazine, and it's one of my all-time favorites. I'm honored to be a part of your team.
We appreciate that. We value you as well.
Well, thanks, Colton. And if you have questions for us, folks, of course, you can email me at backcountryhuntingpodcast@gmail.com and ask questions. You can send me questions on Instagram if you don't mind a little short response with my thumb. But the best way, of course, is through patreon.com/backcountry. If you join our membership there, I give priority to all of our questions coming from Patreon. Well, it's a good way for folks to follow along with your adventures, Colton.
Just through Petersen's Hunting social media pages, Facebook and Instagram both. I mean, I have a personal one, but everything now is kind of routed through the Petersens. So
outstanding.
Yep.
All right. Thanks again, buddy.
Thank you.
Folks, thanks for tuning in and watching today. I'm Joseph Von Benedict here with Colton Heward, and we'll see you in the backcountry.